I thought I would show you guys how to make custom sized plattens. So the school already has plattens, one that's 4x8 and one that's 4x4, which match the size of our vacuum bags. And those work really great for any time that you're doing a flat veneer press because you don't really need any additional height in the bag. But once you start to introduce molds that have some height, the larger the platen is, the more likely it will start to interfere with how much the bag can stretch and conform to your mold. And worst case scenario, it will actually snap your platen in half in an effort to try to free up a bit of extra slack in the bag. So for me, I pretty much will never use a full-size platen because I'm always putting some kind of mold of some kind of height into the bag. Sometimes my molds are so tall that I actually don't use a platen at all. I'll just put in just the mold, and instead of using a platen to evacuate the air from the bag, I'll use this special plastic netting that does the same thing as a platen does, just creates air channels to pull air out of the vacuum bag. But another great alternative, if you're using a more shallow mold that doesn't take up too much space height-wise, is to just make a custom size platen. So this is a 2x3 foot piece of 3/4 melamine that I just got from Home Depot. It's extremely cheap. It's like $30 for a 4x8 sheet. So just buying a single sheet can yield a lot of plattens if you're not making a 4x8 one. And then I've already gone ahead and I've rounded all of the corners on my melamine, just because this hard white top on the melamine tends to be incredibly sharp to work with when it's cut at 90 degrees. So I didn't really want to be handling this melamine while it was super sharp and unpleasant to work with, so I rounded over the corners. But regardless, you're going to have to round over the corners to be able to put the melamine in the bag. The bag is made out of vinyl, which is quite tough, but it still can get cut. And once it gets cut open, it's never gonna have quite the same amount of pull strength again, even if you do patch the bag. Bags come in two different materials, vinyl and polyurethane. Polyurethane is significantly more expensive, but stronger and has more stretch and more puncture resistant. I've actually only done one glue up with a polyurethane bag, and it kind of threw me off a little bit just because I was so used to using the vinyl bag, because it's just so much more slippery and way less inclined to get caught on things. Anyway, so if you probably have seen the plattens at school if you've taken Furniture 1 and you've veneered your demi-loom table, but all it is a sheet of 3/4 melamine with grooves running through the melamine. And I'm just gonna make those grooves or those channels with just my 1/8 inch table saw blade. And I'll probably set my table saw blade to about 1/4 inch tall. There's not really a particular height. The main thing is that you want the grooves deep enough that the vinyl bag can't sink into the grooves and close those air channels. And additionally, if any beads of glue get into the grooves, they also won't obstruct the air channels. So I think 1/4 inch is a good amount. It's 1/3 of the thickness, so it's not going to compromise the strength of the melamine, but it also is nice and deep. So I think I'll be spacing my grooves every 3 inches. Seems like a good amount to me. I've seen a pretty wide variety of what people space theirs at. I've seen anything from every 2 inches to every 6 inches, so I don't think it's a really particular measurement. All I gotta do is just make sure that I don't have any sharp edges exposed at all on my platen. And now I'm going to drill my hole to insert the vacuum hose into the platen and I should be good to go. I have drilled a 3/8 hole centered on the edge of the long side and the short side of my platen. So that way I could plug the vacuum hose with this platen oriented in either direction inside the bag. And as a final precaution, I'm just going to wax the melamine a little bit, just because, particularly with all these grooves running through the melamine, if the glue is drying there long enough, it can be really hard to scrape off. So I just want to give myself a little bit of an edge. So, as I said before, I happen to have a vinyl bag. I bought mine from Vacuum Pressing Systems, otherwise known as Vacuum Press, which is also the same place where I bought my vacuum pump. It's the same brand as the school pumps. I am not sure if our bags are also Vacuum Press. But as you can see, I've centered my platen in the bag. Because this bag is 4x8 feet, which is kind of overkill, I've folded the bag in half and basically created a 4 foot by 4 foot bag instead. And then the bag is closed with what are called C-clamp closures. So all it is a tube of plastic with a C-shaped piece of plastic that clamps onto that inner tube. And basically the vacuum is sealed with a press fit. So I've already clamped and sealed one half of the bag because I'm just making my workload a little bit less for when I am ready to put my mold in here. And then on the bottom of the bag is going to be a vinyl nipple that's also going to be 3/8 of an inch. This is the vacuum hose that comes out of the vacuum pump. So I'm just going to push the hose, the brass fitting on the hose, through the nipple. And these particular brass fittings on the end of the vacuum hoses are designed to be used with 3/4 melamine. So they'll come exactly into the bottom of the grooves that you've cut to evacuate air. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pull a vacuum on just the platen to test it out, make sure it can fully evacuate air, make sure there isn't anything important that I've overlooked. So I can close this bag. You'll often see strips of Velcro or snaps on the end of the bags to help you hold that initial tube. So I put the tube in, I folded the vinyl over it, and I've centered the tube so a little bit of the tube is poking out on either side of the bag. Now I'm going to put on the C-clamp closure. And this is kind of like a glue up where if you start snugging it on both ends simultaneously, you usually end up with air bubbles or wrinkles in the bag. So start from one end, go to the other, or start from the center, go to the other. And now I'm going to pull a vacuum. Okay, so you can see that all the air that the bag can physically push out by closing the two vinyl surfaces together has been evacuated from the bag. There is now a vacuum inside the bag, and so the atmospheric pressure is pushing down and acting as a clamp. In Denver, it's about 12 pounds per square inch. And the reason why my vacuum pump shut off so quickly is because I had very little air in the bag to begin with. My platen was quite flat, and I had closed the bag so that there weren't any significant air bubbles in the bag. The more air you introduce to the bag, the longer it will take the pump to pull that air out. And the pump has 2 cycles. It has auto cycle and continuous cycle. Typically, I would always recommend auto cycle. That just means every single time the pressure falls below a certain point, it will turn the pump back on again. If you run it at continuous cycle, the motor tends to overheat pretty quickly. So I've really only run things at continuous cycle if I have a significant hole in the bag that I can't repair on the fly, and an important glue up inside that bag. I'll just set up some fans to cool down the motor. Okay, so now that I've tested my platen, now I'll be ready to test my mold out, and then finally I'll be ready to do my glue up.